This video has been sponsored by Squarespace. Since Tolkien practically invented fantasy some 70 years ago, the genre has exploded in variety, and one of my favorite branches of fantasy is grimdark. Fantasy that delves into the deepest, darkest parts of the human condition. Fantasy that eschews the happy endings of works like The Lord of the Rings and dives headfirst into tragedy. But what a lot of people don't know is that one of Tolkien's most complete non-Lord of the Rings works is in itself quite tragic, and I would argue a bit grimdark. That work is called The Children of Húrin. Sometimes referred to as the Game of Thrones of The Lord of the Rings, The Children of Húrin is an incredibly dark and twisted tale. It's got blood, siblings getting it on with siblings, dragons, more blood, and it's both impressive on its own as a story, and because it is so tonally different to The Lord of the Rings. But what I really find fascinating about The Children of Húrin is the way that it evokes ancient pre-Christian modes of tragedy. There's a distinct flavor of hopelessness to Túrin's world, starkly at odds with the overall very optimistic world of Middle-earth, and Tolkien uses the contrast inherent in that masterfully to evoke even more tragedy. Today, I'm going to share with you the tale of The Children of Húrin, explore some of its inspirations, and talk about how it might just be the most tragic tale Tolkien ever could have told. Now, I do ask that all of you bear with me, because there's a lot of names in this story, and I keep messing them up. I keep calling Beren Túrin, and that's bound to slip through at some point in this script, and I will be putting corrections on screen if I utterly mess up the names of characters. It's just kind of hard to keep track. But a really good way to keep track would be to make a website, and I can do that so easily and conveniently using this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website building platform that's going to allow you to stand out and succeed online. With Squarespace's cutting-edge design tools, anyone can build themselves a perfect, entirely customized website. Just start with one of their professionally designed website templates or with their Blueprint AI website builder, and use their intuitive drag and drop technology to create a website that beautifully matches your brand and personal style. And with Squarespace's email campaigns feature, you're gonna have all the tools you need to engage clients, promote your services, and grow your business. You can set up automated emails to stay connected and drive growth while saving yourself time, and you can seamlessly integrate your product right into your emails. If you're interested in overhauling your existing brand or establishing an entirely new online presence, Squarespace is the place to do it. Just head on down to squarespace.com for a completely free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JessOfTheShire to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, and thanks to all of you for checking out my sponsors. We open in the First Age, right around the same time that the events of the tale of Beren and Luthien are occurring, and if you want to learn more about that story, I did a full video about that, and you can check that out up above, or I'll link that in the description. We meet Húrin, a man of the noble house of Hador, and his wife, Morwen. Morwen was actually a close relative of Beren, and with these two proud bloodlines combining, their children were destined for greatness. Their firstborn son, Túrin, was born in the same year that Beren and Luthien met, and even from a very young age, you could tell that he had gotten a little something from both of his parents. He was dark-haired as his mother, and promised to be like her in mood also, for he was not merry and spoke little, though he learned to speak early and ever seemed older than his years. Túrin was slow to forget injustice or mockery, but the fire of his father was also in him, and he could be sudden and fierce. Yet he was quick to pity, and the hurts or sadness of living things might move him to tears. Before long, Morwen and Húrin had a second child, a daughter that they named Urwen, but they called her Leleith, a name which means laughter, because she filled the halls of their ancestral home, Dorlomen, with the sound of her childlike joy. And although Leleith was certainly and obviously the favorite child, Túrin didn't resent her. Rather, he would watch her from a distance, making sure that she was safe whenever she played. However, there were some things that Túrin could not protect her from, and when sickness came to the house, Lalaith's laughter was gone forever. Túrin took his sister's death hard, and he found solace in the servant of the house, a man named Sador. Sador had once been a soldier, fighting alongside Túrin's grandfather in a great war, but he had left war, seeking a life of peace, to become a woodcutter. But that dream was cut short, when in an accident he severed his own foot with an axe. When Túrin comes to him, seeking advice and company, Sador portentously warns him, "A man that flies from his fear may find that he has only taken a shortcut to meet it." Sador had no way of knowing just how true this would prove for young Túrin. One year, on his birthday, Túrin is gifted an heirloom sword, and his father names him heir of the House of Hador. And although he gives the sword away to Sador as a gift for his company, Túrin holds tightly onto that title, repeating it to himself in pride. He has finally found his identity. Word begins to spread of Beren and Lúthien's defeat of Morgoth, and thinking the Dark Lord weakened, the elves and men begin amassing an army to go and face him head-on. Although Morwen has just fallen pregnant, Húrin abandons his pregnant wife and son to go and volunteer for this war. The battle that follows is called the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and as the name implies, it was an unmitigated disaster. The forces of elves and men are decimated by Morgoth's armies, and in the aftermath, Húrin is taken before Morgoth as a prisoner of war. Morgoth offers Húrin freedom in exchange for the secret knowledge that he holds of the location of the hidden city of Gondolin. Húrin flatly refuses, and Morgoth moves on to threaten his family. But Húrin only laughs. Then Morgoth, stretching out his long arm towards Dorlomin, cursed Húrin and Morwen and their offspring, saying, "Behold, the shadow of my thought shall lie upon them wherever they go, and my hate shall pursue them to the ends of the world. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death." These words would echo through the ages, and with them ringing in the air, Morgoth seats Húrin on a high peak and lends him all of Morgoth's omniscience, his knowledge, his ability to see everything, so that he might watch the fate of this curse play out in all its gory detail. Following the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, the land of Húrin and his forefathers is overtaken by enemy Easterlings, but Morwen refuses to leave. The Easterlings are scared of her power, so she is relatively safe, but mostly it's because she wants to wait for Húrin to return. She does, however, send Túrin away to the elf king Thingol in Doriath to protect him from potential enslavement, and so Túrin reluctantly leaves, leaving his home and his family behind for good. He finds shelter in Doriath, where Thingol and Melian, the parents of Lúthien, welcome him as a son, and when Túrin is safe, they send messengers back to Dorlomin, telling Morwen that it is safe and that they should come and join him, but having just given birth, she refuses. She names her new daughter Nienor, which means mourning, and she continues her vigil, awaiting the arrival of Húrin. Morwen does, however, send Túrin the Helm of Hador, a relic of his house and an important reminder of who he is to become. Tolkien describes it. That helm was made of grey steel adorned with gold, and on it were graven runes of power. A power was in it that guarded any who wore it from wound or death. Upon its crest was set in defiance a gilded image of Glaurung the dragon, for it had been made soon after he first issued from the gates of Morgoth. Often Hador and Galdor after him had borne it in war, and the hearts of the host of Hithlum were uplifted when they saw it, towering high amid the battle. It is a heavy burden for the young, troubled Túrin to bear. Still, he has a charmed upbringing in the court of Thingol. He learns elvish ways, and even befriends an elf named Beleg. He does, however, make his own fair share of enemies, such as the jealous court advisor, Saeros. And Saeros is more than happy when at 17 years old, Túrin decides to make a man of himself and leave Thingol's halls to wander the wilderness. He doesn't return for 3 years, and when he does return, he's become a rugged, wild thing. And of course, after those 3 years when he returns, Thingol is currently not at home, and so instead he has to have dinner with Saeros, who wastes absolutely no time in beginning to taunt him. He criticizes Túrin's appearance and manners, but he crosses a line when he begins to insult the women of the House of Hador. Túrin lashes out, throwing his goblet at Saeros' face, and it hits him, and Túrin runs in shame, planning on leaving the very next morning. But Saeros, still holding on to his bitterness, attacks Túrin before he can leave. Túrin easily fights him off, but this attack sends him into a rage, and he begins hunting Saeros like a dog hunting a deer. In this frenzied chase, Saeros slips and falls into a gorge and dies. Túrin is shaken out of his rage immediately, but he's overwhelmed by guilt, and he's terrified of what Thingol will say or do to him for killing an important member of his court, and so he flees the scene of the crime. However, Thingol is much more generous than Túrin gives him credit for. He hears the whole story, and he decides that he wants to forgive Túrin. He wants to bring him back home. So he sends Túrin's friend Beleg after him, allowing him to take a sword from the royal armory for the journey. Beleg chooses the meteorite-forged sword Anglakel, despite Melian's warnings that the sword carries its own malice. With Thingol's blessing, Beleg heads out west on Túrin's heels. Out west, Túrin stumbles across a band of Garwaith, wild men of the forest who loot and kill as it pleases them. And although he recognizes that they are wicked, that they're evildoers, he decides to join their rank. And in his ongoing bitterness, he tells them that his name is Nathan the Wronged. Guilt and resentfulness towards his own terrible, terrible luck will go on to fuel Túrin for some time. One day, while out in the forest, a terrified woman sprints past Túrin, and without thinking, he kills the man that was chasing her. However, it turns out that the man that was chasing her was the leader of the Garwaith, chasing her so that he could assault her. Túrin is disgusted by this behavior, and when he returns to the camp of the Garwaith, he says that he should be their leader now, and this coup is supported by one of the important wild men, Androg. After an entire year of chasing them, Beleg catches up to the Garwaith, but Túrin is away when he arrives, and even though Beleg walks up completely unarmed, not planning to do them any harm, they tie him up and torture him until Túrin can return and fix their evildoing. His heart is softened upon seeing his old friend Beleg has chased after him, and although he will not abandon his men, he does decide to amend his ways. I repent every stroke save those dealt against the enemy of men and elves, and above all else, I would have you beside me. Stay with me. If I stayed beside you, love would lead me, not wisdom, said Beleg. My heart warns me that we should return to Doriath. Beleg tells Túrin that he has been forgiven, and begs for him to return home, but Túrin's path has been set. The two part ways, and Beleg goes home to report to Thingol, but he's scarcely arrived back when he decides that he's going to leave again. He's going to go find Túrin and stay with him. Melian blesses his journey with a gift of sacred lembas bread, and Beleg sets out, bearing Túrin's helm of Hador. Túrin, meanwhile, begins turning his mind towards stability, and he starts looking for a place where they can spend the winters. It is during this search that he encounters Mim, the petty dwarf. Petty dwarves are a now scarce species of dwarf, known for their very small size, and their hatred of everyone and everything outside of themselves. When the Garwaith find Mim, they believe him to be a dwarf, and they very nearly slaughter him like vermin, until Túrin steps in to stop them. Mim begs for mercy, explaining that he's not an orc, and Túrin has mercy. However, he does ask that in payment for Mim's life, Mim gives them a place to stay. Mim agrees and takes them to his secret home. However, upon arriving there, Mim discovers that his son has been killed the previous night by an arrow shot by Androg, who thought that the child was a monster or an animal. And although Mim reluctantly holds up his end of the bargain, he does allow them to stay. He does have his own demands. He that loosed the shaft shall break his bow and his arrows, and lay them at my son's feet, and he shall never take an arrow nor bear bow again. If he does, he shall die by it. That curse I lay on him. Androg was afraid when he heard of this curse, and though he did so with great grudge, he broke his bow and his arrows and laid them at the dead dwarf's feet. But as he came out of the chamber, he glanced evilly at Mim and muttered, "The curse of a dwarf never dies, they say, but a man's too may come home. May he die with a dart in his throat." Despite this tension, Turin and the Garwaith do find peace here, and Turin and Mim even become friends of a sort. They spend long nights speaking while Turin sits in Mim's forge. After some time, Beleg hunts them down, and Turin is overjoyed to see his friend. He's grateful for his presence, he's grateful that he brought the Helm of Hador. However, he refuses to accept the elven gift of lembas bread. He's not ready to accept any gift from an elvish king. "Then send back your sword and your arms," said Beleg. "Send back also the teaching and fostering of your youth, and let your men, who you say have been faithful, die in the desert to please your mood. Nonetheless, this waybread was a gift, not to you, but to me, and I may do with it as I will. Eat it not if it sticks in your throat, but others may be more hungry and less proud." Turin's eyes glinted, but as he looked in Beleg's face, the fire in them died, and they went grey, and he said in a voice hardly to be heard, "I wonder, friend, that you deign to come back to such a churl. From you I will take whatever you give, even rebuke. Henceforward you shall counsel me in all ways, save the road to Doriath only." With Beleg's help, Turin transforms the Garwaith into a noble band, fighting off wandering hordes of orcs, nipping away at Morgoth's power bit by bit. As Morgoth catches word of the renegade band in the forest, he sends more and more orcs their way. They are able to resist until Mim betrays them. The resentment that Mim first held towards Androg has only ripened over time, and it has also turned into a hatred of the elf Beleg. First off, Mim was jealous of Beleg and Turin's friendship, but he was also quite bitter because Beleg refuted Mim's curse on Androg. Androg took up a bow like he swore he would never do again, and in that fight he was injured, as Mim's curse dictated. However, Beleg used his elvish healing powers to heal Androg, and Mim's curse was broken. And this is all enough for the petty dwarf to snap. He goes out and finds a band of orcs and leads them to his own home. The Garwaith are all slaughtered. Androg is mortally wounded, and only Turin and Beleg make it out alive. Turin is dragged off to be a prisoner of war, and Beleg is bound and left helpless on the top of a mountain. Mim approaches with a knife ready to wreak his vengeance upon Beleg, but Androg uses his last breaths to kill Mim and save him. Beleg searches through the corpses for Turin, but when he realizes he's been taken off, he chases after him once more. Along the journey, Beleg stumbles across Gwyndor, an elf who is a soldier in the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears, who has just escaped orcish imprisonment. Although he is weak and traumatized, he helps Beleg to track down Turin. They find him in an orcish camp, bound and being tortured to the point of unconsciousness. Using the cover of a thunderstorm, Beleg and Gwyndor sneak into the orc encampment and steal Turin away to safety. Beleg goes to cut through Turin's bonds to free him, but the sharp blade Anglekel slips and nicks Turin's foot. And this small mistake, this little slip, is the catalyst to his tragic end. Then Turin was roused into a sudden wakefulness of rage and fear, and seeing a form bending over him in the gloom, with a naked blade in hand, he leapt up with the great cry, believing that orcs were coming to torment him. And grappling with him in the darkness, he seized Anglekel and slew Beleg Cuthalion, thinking him a foe. But as he stood, finding himself free and ready to sell his life dearly against his imagined foes, there came a great flash of lightning from above them, and in its light he looked down on Beleg's face. Then Turin stood stone still and silent, staring on that dreadful death, knowing what he had done, and so terrible was his face, lit by the lightning that flickered all about them, that Gwyndor cowered down upon the ground, and dared not raise his eyes. No matter where Turin goes, or how far he runs, he cannot escape the terrible doom of Morgoth. With Gwyndor's urging, they bury Turin's best friend, and press onward. They are found by the elves of Nargothrond and brought back to the city, and although Gwyndor is originally from Nargothrond, he is so emaciated from his time in prison that no one recognizes him. No one except his fiancée from before the war, Finduilas. They are welcomed in, but Turin refuses to give them his true name, instead introducing himself. I am Agarwayan, the son of Umarth, which is blood-stained, son of ill fate, a hunter in the woods. The only way that Turin can possibly cope with the terrible things he's done is by blaming all of it on the ill fate that has pursued him from birth. In Nargothrond, Turin has Beleg's sword Anglekel reforged, and it becomes Gurthang, the Black Sword. And Turin wants this sword to taste blood. He leverages his worldliness and competence to become a prominent advisor to the king, where he pushes for a very aggressive, outright war approach towards Morgoth. And the only one who will protest against this is Gwyndor. Gwyndor says, "Only in secrecy lies hope of survival, until the Valar come." "The Valar," said Turin. "They have forsaken you, and they hold men in scorn. What use to look westward across the endless sea to a dying sunset in the west? There is but one Valar with whom we have to do, and that is Morgoth. And if, in the end, we cannot overcome him, at least we can hurt him and hinder him. Though mortal men have little life beside the span of the elves, they would rather spend it in battle than fly or submit. The defiance of Húrin Thalion is a great deed, and though Morgoth slay the doer, he cannot make the deed not to have been. Even the lords of the West will honor it, and is it not written into the history of Arda, which neither Morgoth nor Manwë can unwrite?" This is the first time that Turin's bitterness to the world is being fully expressed, and it's also an excellent insight into the mindset that he's adopted. The elves have enough age and foresight to know that the Valar are at work in the world. They know that plans against an evil like Morgoth must be schemed over centuries. But Turin has no reason to believe this. The cruelty and happenstance he's endured have made him lose all hope in divine providence. He believes only in action, brutal, bloody action. Meanwhile, Finduilas, Gwyndor's beloved, finds her eyes straying in Turin's direction. Although she had promised herself to Gwyndor, Turin is now everything that Gwyndor is no longer. He is tall, proud, with all of the violent vivaciousness of a man, with the courtly education of an elven court. Finduilas falls for Turin as he falls for her. She listens raptly to his troubles, and he shares his heart with her, even if he keeps his true identity a secret. Gwyndor tries to warn her away. He even tells her Turin's true name in the hopes that that will scare her off, but none of it works. She willingly accepts the doom that will be laid upon them. But we get a really interesting look into Turin's psychology when he finds out that Gwyndor told Finduilas his true name. He rages. "In love I hold you for rescue and safekeeping, but now you have done ill to me, friend, to betray my right name and call down my doom upon me from which I would lie hid." But Gwyndor answered, The doom lies in yourself, not in your name. Gwyndor is right, of course. No matter how many new names Turin takes on, no matter how many times he tries to change or hide his identity, he cannot escape being a damned son of Húrin. As Turin pushes Nargothrond towards open war, they receive a warning from the Valar Ulmo himself, who tells them that they are not prepared to face the force that Morgoth mounts towards them. But even the word of a god is not enough to sway Turin from vengeance, and war comes. And all of their plans come crashing down when they realize that Morgoth's forces are led by the dragon Glaurung. Glaurung was the first dragon ever created, the decisive factor in the Battle of Dagor Bragollach and the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. And now Glaurung tears into Nargothrond, destroying it utterly. Gwyndor is mortally wounded, and with his last words he issues a dire warning to Turin. He must go back to Nargothrond and rescue Finduilas, and if he does not do this, his fate will become inescapable. Turin returns to Nargothrond, determined to fulfill his friend's dying wish, but he is stopped by Glaurung. Without fear, Turin looked into those eyes as he raised up his sword, and straightway he fell under the dreadful spell of the dragon, and was as one turned to stone. Thus long they stood unmoving, silent before the great doors of Felagund. Then Glaurung spoke again, taunting Turin. "Evil have been all your ways, son of Húrin," said he. "Thankless fostering, outlaw, slayer of your friend, thief of love, usurper of Nargothrond, captain foolhardy, and deserter of your kin. As thralls, your mother and sister live in Dorlomin, in misery and want. You are arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags. For you they yearn, but you care not for that." Glaurung tells Turin that his mother and sister are in peril, and Turin snaps up the bait, abandoning Finduilas and chasing after ghosts. But when he arrives in Dorlomin, he finds it abandoned. Easterlings have entirely taken over, and the only member of his household left is the old servant Sador. Sador tells him that Morwen and his sister left long ago for the safety of Doriath. Turin has been fooled by Glaurung, master of lies. In a fit of rage, Turin kills the new master of the land and manages to get Sador killed in the process, and then he chases after Finduilas, hoping to keep the last of his honor from slipping through his fingers. But he's far, far too late. He encounters a troop of the men of Brethiel, who inform him that Finduilas is long dead. She was speared through by orcs and left to die, still pinned to a tree. They have buried her in a mound, and it is there that Turin falls to his knees, mourning what fate and his own actions have accomplished. And although his agony is at its peak, this is able to effect a profound change. But when at last Turin shook off the darkness, spring was returning, and he awoke and saw sun on the green buds. Then the courage of the house of Hador awoke in him also, and he arose and said in his heart, "All my deeds and past days were dark and full of evil, but a new day has come. Here I will stay at peace, and renounce name and kin, and so I will put my shadow behind me, or, at the least, not lay it upon those that I love." Therefore he took a new name, calling himself Turambar, which in the High Elven speech signified Master of Doom. Determined to become master of his own fate, Turin sets aside the black sword Gurthang and makes himself a new home amongst the men of Brethiel. Meanwhile, his mother Morwen and his sister Niniel are becoming more and more restless in their new home. Ignoring the advice of Thingol, Morwen strikes out from Doriath alone, determined to hunt down Turin her son herself. She's unaware that Thingol sends a troop of elves after her to keep an eye on her and only step in the case that things get bad. Of course, she finds out that they are following her soon enough, but she wasn't expecting to see that her daughter Niniel had snuck into their ranks. They were dismayed, and none more than Morwen, Go back, I command you," she cried. "If the wife of Húrin can go forth against all counsel at call of kindred," said Nienor, "then so also can Húrin's daughter. Mourning you named me, but I will not mourn alone, for father, brother, and mother. But of these you only have I known, and above all do I love. And nothing that you fear, not do I fear." With little other choice, Morwen relents, and they all press on in search of Turin. But before they find him, Glaurung finds them, and he startles their horses, sending them scattering. Morwen is lost in the forest, and Nienor falls off of her horse and waits for the leader of the party, Mablung or Morwen, to find her. However, the wicked worm finds her first. "What do you seek here?" Glaurung said, and constrained to answer, Nienor said, "I do but seek one Turin that dwelt here a while, but he is dead, maybe." "I know not," said Glaurung. "He was left here to defend the women and weaklings, but when I came he deserted them and fled. A boaster, but a craven it seems. Why seek you such a one?" "You lie," said Nienor. "The children of Húrin at least are not craven. We fear you not." Then Glaurung laughed, for so was Húrin's daughter revealed to his malice. "Then you are fools, both you and your brother," said he, "and your boast shall be made vain, for I am Glaurung." Then he drew her eyes to his, and her will swooned. And it seemed to her that the sun sickened, and all became dim about her, and slowly a great darkness drew down on her, and in that darkness there was emptiness. She knew nothing and heard nothing, and remembered nothing. Mablung, the leader of the elf troop, is unable to find either mother or daughter, and he returns to Doriath to report his failure. Meanwhile, with no memory of who she is or where she is, Nienor sprints through the forest terrified, the thorns and branches catching and tearing at her clothing. Eventually, naked and exhausted, she falls to the ground asleep, and it is there, lying atop Finduilas's grave, that Turin finds her, and he sees that she is laying on the grave as a sign that he may now seek new love. Turambar coming lifted her, and the water dripped from her drenched hair, but she closed her eyes and quivered and strove no more. Then, marveling that she lay thus naked, Turambar cast his cloak about her and bore her away to the hunter's lodge in the woods. There they lit a fire and wrapped coverlets about her, and she opened her eyes and looked upon them. And when her glance fell on Turambar, a light came in her face, and she put out a hand towards him, for it seemed to her that she had found at last something that she had sought in the darkness, and she was comforted. It's kind of unsurprising that these lonely siblings find an instant connection to each other, but it is a cruel, cruel working of the doom of Morgoth that they interpret these feelings of connection as romantic love. Turin names her Niniel, which means maid of tears, and although she has many nurses caring for her, she only lights up when Turin walks into the room. But Niniel recovers quickly, demonstrating an impressive zeal for the newly discovered world around her. After so long in darkness, Turin sees Niniel as his light, his reward for finally walking down the path towards good, and the two fall in love quickly. Only Brandir, the chieftain of the men of Brethiel, tries to stop this relationship. He too has feelings for Niniel, but he also recognizes that within Turin there is some kind of lingering darkness that will come back. Perhaps somehow subconsciously aware of the wrongness of their union, Brandir urges them to wait before they get married. Niniel reluctantly agrees to that, but before long Turin sways her. "Do as your heart bids you, Niniel most dear, but see, this is the choice before me. I will go back now to war in the wild, or I will wed you, and go never to war again, save only to defend you if some evil assails our home." Then she was glad indeed, and she plighted her troth, and at the midsummer they were wedded. For a time, Niniel and Turin are happy, but bands of orcs begin closing in, and Turin must take up Gurthang once more to defend his home and his wife. Niniel falls pregnant just as Turin catches word that his old enemy Glaurung is on the way, and Turin cannot resist the idea of vengeance. As he explains to Niniel, they've run far enough from fate, and they can run no longer. They are trapped, and he must face what is to come. Joined by the only 2 men brave enough to volunteer to go with him, Turin goes out to meet Glaurung in the wilderness. One of the men he loses because he gets too afraid and runs. The other man is killed by a falling stone, and so now alone, Turin awaits in a cleft in the ground for Glaurung to arrive. When Glaurung's stinking belly is just above him, he thrusts into the beast with Gurthang, through the gut all the way to the hilt. Glaurung writhes away with an earth-shaking scream, but Turin chases after him, determined to make sure that this job is finished. He proudly declares that now his vengeance is wrought, and he rips Gurthang free from the monster's side. But this is a tragic mistake. His toxic black blood sprays out of the open wound, coating Turin's hand, and it poisons him to unconsciousness. It is there that his wife Niniel finds him, and fallen, she thinks him dead. She weeps and cleans and binds his hand, but it is no use. Turin will not wake, but something else does. At the cry of Niniel, Glaurung stirred for the last time, and a quiver ran through all his body, and he opened his baleful eye a slit, and the moon gleamed in them, as gasping he spoke. "Hail, Nienor, daughter of Húrin! We meet again ere we end. I give you joy that you have found your brother at last, and now you shall know him. A stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin. Turin, son of Húrin. But the worst of all his deeds you shall feel in yourself." Then Nienor sat as one stunned, but Glaurung died, and with his death the veil of his malice fell from her, and all her memory grew clearer before her. From day unto day, neither did she forget any of those things that had befallen her since she lay on Harun Eleth, and her whole body shook with horror and anguish. Brandir watches helplessly from afar as Niniel, Nienor, the sister of Turin and wife of Turambar, realizes just how Morgoth's doom has exacted itself upon her, and she simply cannot bear the burden of the truth. Swiftly she came to the brink of Cabed en Aras, and there stood and looked on the loud water, crying, "Water, water, take me now, Niniel Nienor, daughter of Húrin, mourning, mourning daughter of Morwen. Take me and bear me down to the sea." With that, she cast herself over the brink, a flash of white, swallowed in the dark chasm, a cry lost in the roaring of the river. Turin wakes to find himself alone, and although he wonders at his freshly bandaged hand, he doesn't think much of it. He drags himself home, where he is confronted by Brandir, who tells him the terrible truth that his wife, and also his sister, is now dead. Turin cannot believe this, and in his rage he murders Brandir before fleeing for Doriath, where he thinks that his sister still lives. But along the way, he encounters Mablung, who tells him that Niniel actually was lost, wandering the forest where Turambar lived. Brandir had spoken the truth, and this is the final blow for Túrin Turambar. Then he drew forth his sword and said, "Hail, Gurthang, iron of death, you alone now remain. But what lord or loyalty do you know, save the hand that wields you? From no blood will you shrink. Will you take Túrin Turambar? Will you slay me swiftly?" And from the blade rang a cold voice in answer, "Yes, I will drink your blood, that I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandir, slain unjustly. I will slay you swiftly." Then Turin set the hilt upon the ground, and cast himself upon the point of Gurthang, and the black blade took his life. Túrin Turambar named himself that, the Master of Doom, but I don't think he realized just how true this would prove to be. In the end, the only control that Túrin is able to gain over the doom of his life is by deciding how it will end. Gurthang shatters with this final blow, and the men of Brethil bury Túrin and his sister together in a marked grave. Now that his children are dead, Húrin is released from his imprisonment, and he stumbles through the world wraith-like to the grave of his children. A beggar approaches from behind, and she pulls back her hood to reveal a familiar face. It's Morwen. She asks Húrin what happened to their children, but he cannot bring himself to answer. Just by looking at his wife, he can see that she is too frail to live out the night. She clutched at his cloak. "Little time is left," she said. "If you know, tell me. How did she find him?" But Húrin did not answer, and he sat beside the stone with Morwen in his arms, and they did not speak again. The sun went down, and Morwen sighed and clasped his hand, and was still, and Húrin knew that she had died. Thus concludes the tragedy of the children of Húrin. If this is your first time hearing this story, or you've only ever read the rather truncated version that can be found in the Silmarillion, I do highly recommend that you check out the full novelized version of this story by Christopher Tolkien. Especially compared to the other supplementary Tolkien novels that are out there, this one really is quite novel-like, and however obscenely long this video has already been, there's a lot of great detail in that version that I just wasn't able to get to here, so please do check that out if you're interested in the story at all. I believe that this tragedy works so well as a tragedy, because in a way it is an amalgamation of some of history's most profoundly agonizing stories. In a letter, Tolkien explains that this story was, at least in some part, inspired by Sigurd the Volsung, Oedipus, and the Finnish Kalervo. So let's go through each of these stories and see where certain elements align. The tale of Sigurd can be found in its most complete version in the 13th century Norse Volsunga saga. It tells of Sigurd, a man of kingly heritage with a dead father. He has a sword that was reforged from a broken sword, and he is largely driven by seeking vengeance for his father's death. And perhaps most strikingly is Sigurd's conflict with the dragon Fafnir, where he hides in a gully as the dragon walks over him and stabs up into his belly. Although Sigurd never sleeps with his sister, he is quite unlucky in love, and it is because of complications around his romantic relationships that he is killed and then buried with his lover. The tale of Sigurd is certainly not a one-to-one comparison to the tale of Túrin, but there are a lot of very familiar echoes, especially when it comes to his fight with the dragon. Next up, of course, is Oedipus, more specifically the tale of Oedipus Rex as told by Sophocles in the 5th century. The ancient Greek play tells of a curse laid upon the father of Oedipus, a curse that can only be fulfilled through the birth of his son. The king is warned by an oracle that his son will kill him and marry his wife, and so the king sends his newborn son to be killed. Oedipus is saved by a humble shepherd and raised by the king of a distant land. But Oedipus will not escape fate so easily. As an adult, he approaches the oracle at Delphi and is informed that a curse lays upon him, a familiar one. He will kill his father and marry his mother. Unaware of his adopted parentage, Oedipus flees home, hoping to circumvent the curse, but as it always does, destiny comes a-knockin' on the road. Since Oedipus never knew his father, when he encounters him on a road, he kills him, fulfilling the first half of the prophecy. Circumstantially, Oedipus is then made king of the dead king's kingdom, and he marries the king's wife, who is his mother. When the truth unfolds and Oedipus finds out how he has been played by fate, he is devastated. His mother hangs herself, and Oedipus gouges his own eyes out and leaves his kingdom, becoming an itinerant wanderer. While the details of Oedipus Rex don't match up quite as cleanly to the details of the story of Turin, thematically, these tales are almost one-to-one. It's this idea that the further you run from fate, the more you enmesh yourself. The final tale that Tolkien referenced is that of Kullervo, whose tale is told in the Finnish Kalevala. Kullervo's father went missing at a young age, and he was sent away from his remaining family due to his fiery temper. He has a special heirloom blade, and he learned many of his skills in the wilderness. Kullervo also has a missing sister, who he stumbles across without recognizing her, and he seduces her and sleeps with her. And when she finds out what has happened, she, just like Nienor, throws herself into the river to die. Kullervo, just like Turin, is driven by a desire for revenge, and when that all falls apart, he too begs his blade for permission to fall upon it. Once again, we see that many aspects of Kullervo's story were adopted into Turin's. And one thing that all of these stories have in common, beyond having been inspirational for Tolkien, is that they are all pagan tragedies with distinctly pagan heroes. Especially in the case of Sigurd and Kullervo, these are tragic heroes of the Norse tradition, and this represents a very special kind of tragedy. The tragic bend from most Norse and Anglo-Saxon stories comes from just how hopeless it all is. Caged in by uncaring fate, these heroes are forced to solve just impossible trolley problems. Do you avenge your brother and save your own kingdom, or do you save your wife's life? You're forced to either give up your kingdom or face your own child on the battlefield. They're given choices between two or more things, but all of the options have evil outcomes. And yet, despite doing a lot of murder and sleeping with their siblings and just doing a whole list of other things that wouldn't hold up in a modern court of law, these people still count as heroes. And that is because they are willing to stand up to the menace of fate. As Bertha Philpotts describes, for them, there is simply the awful choice between two evils. But the point is that there is a choice. It may be no more than a choice between yielding and resisting to the uttermost what is bound to happen. It may be only a choice between two courses, each of which is hateful. The aristocracies of the Nordic peoples felt that a man's will was free, and therefore in some way superior to the fate that crushes him. These tragedies were not intended to be tearjerkers, or to generate pity, or to make you cry into your popcorn. These were moments of pure catharsis, a battle cry against the chains of unfeeling fate. You watch somebody carve their own path for themselves outside of what fate and destiny had dictated, and it may be a terrible path, it may be grim and awful and end in tragedy, but it is still their own path. These heroes were not seeking goodness or righteousness. They were seeking to make their names. The most valuable thing for any warrior to have at this time was fame. Fame was the way that you had your name carved into the records of stories and songs, so that, like Sigurd, your name and your battle with cruel fate may never be forgotten. That was the only thing that made all of that pain worth it. While ancient Norse people certainly had a sense of right and wrong, they did have an idea of justice. As far as we can tell based off of their stories, they didn't view their sense of morality as a universal constant. These moral laws certainly weren't followed by the gods, and fate didn't care about the good of humanity, and they weren't hoping that a divine savior would come in at the end of things to make it all right. And yet, despite all of that, they still fight. Like the gods watching the pillars of the universe collapse in at Ragnarok, They fight not because they can win, but because that is the only way that their actions, their existence, can be justified. As Bertha Philpotts writes, disaster is the final acid test of character. I propose that Turin is a tragic hero in that tradition. Because of the doom of Morgoth brought upon him by his father, he has no real hope. No matter what good Turin seeks, his hands, his words are used for evil. No matter how far he runs from who he is, he cannot escape his name. To Turin, the world that he functions in is no different than the world of Sigurd, one where the idea of divine aid is nothing but fancy. And in the face of all that, what do you have to fight for but those little moments of ever so satisfying freedom that you can gouge out of inescapable destiny? During what is arguably the happiest time of his life, when Beleg and the Garawaith and Turin are all staying in the house of Mim, Beleg and Turin have a very telling conversation. Turin then said to Beleg, "Why are you sad and thoughtful? Does not all go well since you returned to me? Has not my purpose proved good?" "All is well now," said Beleg. "Our enemies are still surprised and afraid, and still good days lie before us. For a while." "And what then?" said Turin. "Winter," said Beleg. "And after that another year for those who live to see it." "And what then?" "The wrath of Angband! We have burned the fingertips of the Black Hand. No more. It will not withdraw." "Nonetheless, I will be the captain of my own host," said Turin. "And if I fall, then I fall. Here I stand in the path of Morgoth, and while I so stand, he cannot use the southward road." This is precisely the attitude that Philpotts describes when she's discussing the pagan hero. Death is an inevitability. He has no hope of seriously changing the world, but a hero like Turin will fight tooth and nail to make sure that the life that he lives is one that he chose for himself. He will stand in the path of evil, even knowing that one day he will be run down and evil will prevail. But the true tragedy here is that Turin is wrong. Arda, the world of Middle-earth, is not meaningless. This is made abundantly clear at the end of The Lord of the Rings, when all is left up to chance, and fate pushes Gollum over the brink. Forces for good are at work in the world, but Turin, so locked into hopelessness, is completely unable to see that. I mean, we have a moment of literal divine intervention when the Valar Ulmo rises out of the sea to give Turin advice, but even then he is so lost in the mires of hopelessness, of pessimism, that he cannot accept that for what it is. Swallowed up by Morgoth's wrath, he labors under the weight of the pagan tragedy, not realizing that this is antithetical to the way that the world really works. And in this way, he is perpetuating his own tragedy. I see this story as Tolkien's contribution to the conversation about the period of time when we pivoted from Norse pagan tragedy to a Christian worldview. When Christianity was introduced into these Norse and Anglo-Saxon societies, the way that they told and remembered stories changed fundamentally. Suddenly, it didn't make sense anymore that a hero might be pushed by Providence into a place where he had to choose between two evil things. There was a good God, and his justice would not allow for circumstances like that to exist. The idea of fame as the reward for a life well lived didn't seem as satisfying as the divine reward of heaven. These new beliefs required a complete transformation of the old tragic modes. If they wanted their heroes to continue to be praiseworthy heroes with this new cultural mindset, they had to declaw a lot of these traditional stories. Now, if a hero slept with his sister and killed people and saw vengeance as his ultimate goal, he wasn't considered a hero anymore. Many traditional stories were rewritten or retold entirely to better conform to these Christian ideals, and a lot of this great cosmic battle against the constraints of fate, being a major plot point, was lost to time. But Tolkien managed to resurrect this pagan hero without dulling his teeth or villainizing him. Even in later letters, Tolkien insists that Túrin Turambar is a hero. This may seem a little bit odd considering all of the just terrible things that Turin has done, but Tolkien evokes such a wretched kind of pity for him. Sure, many of his problems were self-inflicted or self-perpetuated at least, but you can't help but feel for this man who was just torn apart under the wheels of fate. And the truly heroic thing is that through all of this, Turin keeps fighting. He turns his face towards good. He remakes himself into a better person time and time again. He tries so hard to be good, even when he's gotten so much evidence that that's not even possible for him. And truly, I don't know what that is if it's not heroic. I think it is absolutely beautiful that Tolkien allowed room in his legendarium for a fundamentally pagan hero like Turin. Certainly he has plenty more classic heroes. Aragorn is a really great example and an awesome parallel to Turin. You have Frodo and Sam, of course, but he still leaves room to tell a really sympathetic and caring story about Turin. And by welcoming this character into the very Christian world of Middle-earth, Tolkien evokes what just might be the ultimate tragedy. For what could be more existentially terrifying than being a man in a Christian world who cannot see God? Ultimately, the Children of Húrin is just such a masterful example of how storytelling can be used as a tool. Of course, on its own, just as a novel, this story is great and very entertaining, but where it really shines is when you see how it is in conversation with all of the storytelling tradition that has come before it, with the convulsions of this tradition as it has interacted with our ever-changing societal history. While the storytellers of the past may not have had the tools or the foresight to recognize or express how their storytelling tradition was changing over time, with hindsight, Tolkien weaves a tale that masterfully unifies old tragedy and new tragedy to create something truly moving. If you take even one thing from this video, I want it to be that you need to go now and read Bertha Philpott's essay called Weird and Providence in Anglo-Saxon Thought. I actually created a PDF of this essay and I linked that in my sources so you can view it and download it completely for free because it is a little bit hard to come across this essay, which is an absolute shame. Of course, I think about these things probably more than most people, but it really helped a lot of puzzle pieces fall into place for me when it comes to the storytelling ideals and what ideals they were trying to promote in Anglo-Saxon and Norse literature. I know that I make it sound kind of dense when I'm talking about it, but it's a pretty short read, and it is not that difficult to read, and I highly recommend you go check it out if this stuff at all interests you, because I don't think that this essay gets enough attention, in my opinion, so I'm taking it as my solemnly sworn duty to insist that you go do your homework and read that essay. And, of course, go and read The Children of Húrin by Christopher Tolkien, because it's a very good novel, obviously. I quite like it, and if you have read it, let me know who your favorite character is in the comments. And whether or not you've read it, let me know what your favorite dark, grimdark, or tragic fantasy stories are. I'm wrapping up a big reading project right now, and I am always looking for what I'm going to be reading next, so I would love some recommendations. I'm realizing right now, as I record this video, that this video and the last one were both about tragic stories, and I probably used the word tragedy in the titles of both of these videos. I swear I'm not sad. I'm doing okay, the sun is shining, I'm happy, but maybe it is because of that I really like talking about tragedies. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, it got you thinking, or you learned something new, and do consider subscribing to come back here and listen to me ramble about the things I like to ramble about. Thank you so much to all of you for joining me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.